Keynote speaker is George Justice, Dean of Humanities and Professor of English at Arizona State University. Dean Justice is a noted scholar of 18th century literature and the history of publishing. He has a wealth of administrative experience, having served as Vice Provost for Advanced Studies and Dean of the Graduate School while at the University of Missouri-Columbia, where he was instrumental in developing the University of Missouri Informatics Institute and spearheaded Missouri's entry into the Center for the Integration of Research, Training, and Learning, a consortium of 24 universities dedicated to transforming STEM undergraduate education. He is also an expert on graduate education, committed to spending as many hours as humanly possible to improve education for students and help to create knowledge for the world. And I quote, "When we undervalue our educators, we undereducate our children." A sincere and powerful advocate for the humanities, he's determined to make new discoveries to enhance society's understanding of the value of cultures through research, discussion, learning, and reflection from past to present in an effort to shape all of what we do in meaningful ways. Now to enhance us on those efforts, our keynote speaker, George Justice.
Thank you, Peg, for that very kind introduction. Thank you, Glenn, for persisting and inviting me back year after year. I had some pretty serious illness, which I was dealing with, and very delighted to be here, to have this beautiful weather, and to be here in New York State, and my first visit to Syracuse. What I want to do this morning is outline different roles of faculty members in how I see possible ways that universities are going to be transformed in the future. I'm going to focus on thinking about the role of the entrepreneurial professor in years to come, in the way that institutions are developing throughout the wide range of students served, communities served, size of institution, research focus, etc. And we'll get into some of those distinctions as we talk this morning. And I hope we'll have enough time for a conversation right after the session, but I'll be here for the whole conference, and anybody who wants to follow up, whether on these issues or you just want to talk about what you're doing and what your situation is and how you see your future develop, I'd be happy to give my own external perspective on how those things might work for you, and try to give you advice. I've already talked to a couple of you, and it's been really enjoyable, and look forward to getting to know more of you. So about a decade ago, when I was serving as Associate Dean in the Graduate School at the University of Missouri, the Kauffman Foundation, which is a large entrepreneurially oriented foundation in Kansas City, Missouri, sent out a questionnaire to all University of Missouri faculty members and asked us to think about entrepreneurship and how we fit in as faculty members at the university into thinking about entrepreneurial issues. And my immediate reaction, I was very new to administrative life, and I'd lived my academic career within English departments. My immediate thought was, I have nothing to do with entrepreneurialism. I'm an English professor. We study things that are in the past. We have our own guild that discusses these matters, and we teach these matters to students. I'm hoping to get where I had gotten tenure. That was my aspiration. In fact, a tenured faculty member teaching 18th century British literature, I thought, was about as far from being entrepreneurial as you could be. Safe income for the rest of my life, teaching old material that I love to students who may or may not be interested in it. Over the course of the past decade, I've had a serious rethinking about what it might mean to be entrepreneurial. Some of this is very positive. I think thinking in entrepreneurial ways can unleash creativity that we all have within us, whatever the discipline is. But the other aspect, which I'll also talk about this morning, is that with the changing nature of universities and colleges and the changing nature of faculty careers, it's going to be in all of your best interest to think entrepreneurially about what your career in higher education is going to be. And we'll get into some of this as we go on. I thought I'd start as an English professor with the idea of faculty members and entrepreneur. And is that really a bad thing? And I've quoted from the Oxford English Dictionary, which we English professors like to do. And I'll look specifically at, at this definition from 1889. We've been obliged to resort to the French language for a word to designate the person who organizes and directs the productive factors, and we call such a one an entrepreneur. And then just a little bit later in the early 20th century, in modern times, the entrepreneur assumes many forms. He may be a private businessman, partnership, a joint stock company, a cooperative society, a municipality, or similar body. Think about where you might fit in as a faculty member into that list of functions of people who organize an enterprise. What I'm going to suggest to you this morning is that you are all, in the very most limited sense, entrepreneurs in your own career. And you should look at your career the way an entrepreneur looks at a business opportunity. What are the opportunities you have in research, education, reaching students, reaching a public, and think very creatively about the best ways you can reach various audiences with the expertise, the energy, the passion that you have for your subject matter. So, universities are changing. Part of any PFF program or program at a graduate school that aims to introduce students to the wide range of institutions will have introduced you to the fact that higher education is not one thing. When I taught in the Preparing Future Faculty program at Missouri, it had I think, an important mission of acquainting doctoral students, many of whom had only been in research universities, with the wide range of academic institutions, community colleges, small liberal arts colleges, comprehensive public universities, urban public universities, research universities, so that they could understand where they might fit in an ideal sense to these institutions. I would say that with a constricted job market, we have to expand our range and make you think not only of which is the best fit for me, given my talents, my interest in teaching, my research, but how can I maybe negotiate between different kinds of institutions in the future? Because the thought that I had when I got my first job out of graduate school at Marquette University in Milwaukee, I thought that was going to be a great position where I would live my life as an English professor. I've now been at a large number of universities doing a large number of different things, and I have found that to be actually extremely energizing and a positive force in my life, even as it's been complex in terms of understanding the different folks I've been working with. So in the popular media, we've got a terrible academic marketplace, which is true, but instead of thinking of ourselves, recent PhDs, as passive victims of a really screwed up system in which research universities like Arizona State or Syracuse are producing too many PhD students for the limited number of tenure-track jobs that we've all wished, what we need to think about is how do we be aggressive and create circumstances for ourselves that sustain ourselves economically, sustain ourselves intellectually, and allow us to do the work in academia that brought us to graduate school in the first place. So, I want to talk about different ways that every institution that you could be a part of, whether you are at Harvard, at a local community college, at a comprehensive research university, you're going to have to understand the way that universities function along a number of areas. So the economic model, these are enterprises. President of Arizona State University, who got his PhD from the Maxwell School here at Syracuse, but he is a kind of deep thinker about where the future of higher education is going. His book, Designing the New American University, came out last year and is sort of a blueprint for where he thinks research universities are going. We don't use responsibility center management at Arizona State, but many, many universities are working this way. And simply, it's eat what you kill. The academic units that are budgeted by the central administration receive their budgets as some sort of formula based on reaching objectives in the academic mission. And most usually that has to do with undergraduate tuition dollars. So if tuition dollars at every university, which they are a critical component of how the university works, more and more the colleges and more the departments which may make up colleges, such as in my large and complex College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, individual faculty members are going to be having to think about how they contribute to the bottom line of the institution. That was not something I ever thought about 20 years ago when I was coming, or more than 20 years ago, when I was coming out of graduate school, but it is something that I make all of my faculty think about on a daily basis. They can't really, the chair of the English department where I am right now is trying to tell faculty members it doesn't matter if you're in a highly productive research area of the department, you can't get away with teaching 15 undergraduates and 12 graduate students during a year of your teaching, which many of them do. And we all have spreadsheets. We've created a spreadsheet for every faculty member in the college, including non-tenure track faculty members. These are the courses you've taught, and this is the number of students that have been in your course. Now, we haven't done what Texas A&M did about 3 years ago, which was publish that spreadsheet of exactly how many students each faculty member at the university was teaching. But it is a small extrapolation to go from the kind of spreadsheet we keep internally to that public document. And so you should all know most of the institutions that hire you are going to be thinking very specifically about the number of students you bring in, who those students are, and ultimately, what have you killed, so what are you going to eat? How much tuition dollar, how much tuition revenue are you bringing in as a faculty member? So it's responsibility center management really lets deans in most cases manage budgets free of interference from a provost or a president. I actually don't think it's a positive way to think about our academic enterprises because it makes strategic decision making beyond the level of the college almost impossible. Because almost all the money is distributed out to the academic units that produce that amount of revenue. And it was really an Ivy League thing, so places like the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, which is where I got my PhD, could keep its budget and could understand whom they could hire and how much they had to pay for whom they could hire based on how much tuition revenue was coming in for the classes that they taught. But now large state institutions are more and more working along these lines. And it has a lot of implications for what you teach, how you teach, whom you teach with, because your department chairs and your deans are going to want to know that the money, the students that you are bringing in are credited to the college and the department in which you're based. So it can be a really powerful force against innovation and against collaboration across units. So one thing that those of you who are more entrepreneurial minded in terms of looking outside of your disciplines, you're going to have to keep in mind what's the economic basis of that kind of collaboration. So you need to understand as a new faculty member what your contribution is, what your responsibility is to your institution's bottom line, and have that in mind, which is not necessarily a positive thing, because it's a constraint on your freedom in teaching and in research, but it's something to keep in mind as you think about things more creatively. So think about your role in recruiting new students. I never thought it was my job as an English professor to recruit undergraduate students to any of my institutions. I now believe it is every single one of my faculty members' jobs. And our provost was just admonishing the deans the other week to make our faculty members call students who had been admitted to the institution but had not yet put down a deposit, signaling that they were going to come in the fall, because that's tuition revenue the institution needs. So we're in the very uncomfortable position as deans of telling faculty members who we really want to be teaching PhD students and writing the next great piece of scholarship on their academic areas, we're telling them here's a list of students who have been admitted who say they want to major in English, using that as an example. You should call them with a kind of robotic script and encourage them to come to the university as freshmen next year. I think this is going to become more and more important, but even more important than that, retaining the students that we have. Now, this is where I do think we do have a moral obligation. As faculty members, we're dependent on students coming to the institution. Our job, whether we love our research more than our teaching or not, the public doesn't care as much about our research as it does about the fact that we're educating students. So that has to be on your mind at any institution. A lot of it, Arizona State, about 20 years ago, before President Crow came, did a very cynical thing, and it wasn't the only university in the country that did that. It would try to beef up the size of freshman classes. And it was a very cynical maneuver. Those freshmen would pay tuition, and we knew that 40 to 50% of them would not come back for the second year. So the entire infrastructure of the university was predicated upon maybe, let's say 10,000 students coming for the first year at the institution, but that number would decrease to 5,000 to 6,000 the second year. So we've used those dollars to pay the faculty to teach the upper division classes. And that economic model actually was an incentive not to retain the maximum number of students to graduation. I think that's morally reprehensible. We've found our morality, but we've also realized that we make a lot more money out of retaining students who have come to the institution than by just kind of desperately going after recruiting new students. So there is certainly a moral obligation, I believe, in trying to help any student that you've admitted to your institution to be able to succeed, but it's also a very important driver to the bottom line. What that also means is that your deans will be coming to your departments telling you, how are you making sure that students come back? We first started it a couple of years ago. What are you doing for those students at the end of their freshman year to make sure they're coming back their second year? We now are telling them, what are you doing at the end of the fall semester of their first year to make sure that they come back for the spring semester? Because our analysis has determined that some significant percentage of students who are doing well and who certainly can graduate don't come back for the spring semester of their freshman year. So we're putting huge amounts of energy and enlisting faculty members into making sure that any student who is doing well enough to continue is receiving all possible encouragement to be able to come back. So think about this. I've laid out a very strong dean level kind of admonishment to all of you, but as a future faculty member, think about what your responsibility is in terms of recruiting and retention. A lot of this, as I said, we're trying to make faculty do calls and be very close to students in order to get them to come back. We also use technology that allows us to figure out whether students are coming back or not, when they're in danger. And we've also employed a lot of non-faculty advisors and coaches. Now, at some institutions, faculty members, tenure-track faculty members, take umbrage at the idea that non-faculty members would be interacting on a one-to-one basis with their students. Something to think about. Is that in some way an imposition upon your role as a faculty member? Or how does your role as a faculty member change when coaching becomes part of the metaphor for what we do with the students that come under our charge? So in terms of, we talked a little bit about state support and the gloom of state support decreasing. At Arizona State, we've tried to focus on a kind of enterprise model of the institution, which encourages us all to think about being entrepreneurial. That is, we are very grateful for the support the state provides to the university, but we don't count on it, and we foresee that as an institution, we are not dependent upon, begging for, craven in our supplication to the state in order to get those dollars, but we're going to try to take the initiative to bring in money and bring in the resources to do all the academic work, not just the teaching work that the institution does. We know that in New York State, free higher education is now a very big deal. Should higher education be free? In a free higher education system, how do faculty roles change? And they do change because a lot of those students are just showing up to show up. So what the admissions policies and the financial aid policies of an institution are has a lot to do with those students who actually end up sitting in front of you. ASU is committed not to denying any student that we believe is qualified to succeed. So we will accept students with a B average who have taken the college prep courses that our admissions team has determined are necessary for success. We'll take any student who meets those criteria. When I talk to faculty members on their interviews on campus, I point this out to them and say, I personally, because I do, find that to be a very energetic environment. If I'm teaching a Jane Austen lecture to 80 students, 40 of them are first generation students coming from pretty subpar high schools in Arizona. That is a very different thing from teaching at an elite private liberal arts college where all those students have read Jane Austen before they got there. Think about do we provide financial aid and scholarships? Who provides those scholarships? Right now, huge percentages of the financial aid that students receive at most universities is provided internally by the institution. And so there's a discount rate what students actually on average pay to come to your institution. So the sticker, it's like buying a car, the sticker price is never, except for a small number of people who really have the means to pay the full sticker price, most students don't pay a sticker price and what they pay as a result of negotiation. How does that relate to what you do as faculty, to who your students are, and to how they can afford being there? Philanthropy is the other, one of the other key financial opportunities that universities have in the, and will have to even greater extent in the future. Why do people give to higher education? Whether they're students, faculty, or do they give to students? Do they give to faculty? Do they give to facilities? And what is the role of faculty in philanthropy? When you're envisioning what your ideal academic job looks like, are you thinking that 5 hours a week you're going to be dealing with members of the public who might have the financial means to support, whether it's the scholarships that enable your students to be there, or whether it's to provide you with the support to do the scholarship that you believe in? What's your role in cultivating members of the public who might be able to provide that external element of support for the work that you do? Not something that most PhD programs are training their students to think about, but I submit to you it's very much worth thinking about. And I know many faculty who are not just the recipients of their supported positions, but in fact have developed relationships with people of means who become interested in that faculty member's work and then decide to support, whether with an endowment or whether with term financial support, decide to support that faculty member's work. So thinking very entrepreneurially, when you find yourself in a new community and at a new institution, whom are you going to talk to try to secure support that, whether it is for the students, and that's only indirectly supporting you, or whether it's for you or for facilities you need, you may be able to find very direct support for the work that drove you into coming into academia. Research, as we know, does not pay for itself. In a field like English literature, it was not a prerequisite for me to get a faculty tenure track job that I bring in research dollars. We are putting pressure even in the humanities on faculty to think about support from organizations, whether it's from the federal government or from foundations. We want our faculty to be thinking about how can you get substantial support to do that work. We'll talk a little bit about what that work looks like and whether research is going to be different for you in your faculty careers than it has been for you as a graduate student, whether you're in the sciences or humanities or a professional field. Why should a university do research? And that is a fundamental question I'd ask you all to think about as you go into your position, whether it is a very research-intensive position or not. Even community colleges want their faculty to be doing creative work that makes an impact outside of the walls of that college. So think about where you are, what kind of research that you're going to do, and think not just how you yourself are going to fit into it, but think about what the purpose of doing that research is. You might say, well, I mean, if you had asked me 25 years ago, what would you tell an institution about the value of your research? I may have tried to make some stuff up, to be honest, but really the value was it's really interesting, and I think it's a good thing for the world that we know more about the publishing industry in 18th century England. And I do think it's good for the world that we know more about that. But that's really not going to be an adequate answer. So think about what your research is. Think about how it genuinely is contributing to things that people care about. Who should pay for this research? Should the universities pay for it themselves? Should the federal government? Should the foundation? Should industry? Cultivating ties with industry is something that is very natural to engineers. It has not been natural to British literature professors, but it's something that I've been thinking deeply about and want to be able to make the case to certain industrial partners that supporting the work that I do with students, particularly in a realm like digital humanities, can actually be valuable for their interest, for the public, for the students that might get affected. Now, most of us think of, and when you go into a job interview, most of you, you're going to be asked, what is your research? How does it fit into a broader disciplinary approach to knowledge in the area that you've been pursuing? And that's a very discipline-oriented approach to research. What I am seeing more and more of at both of my most recent institutions and when I look at the national scene is that universities are trying to think of faculty research as a resource that can be marshaled by the institution for aims that may be different, not necessarily at odds with, but may be different from the pure research that the disciplines seem to be pursuing in a disciplinary, sort of a projection of where a discipline might be moving. So universities are more and more organizing research efforts around grand challenges. We do it a lot at Arizona State, so we now have the School of Sustainability, which has a very small number of faculty who have tenure homes within the school, but has many, many faculty from everything from the English department to engineering to law to the health professions. Faculty become senior sustainability scholars because their research can contribute to a broader institutional and national effort to think about how we can sustain ourselves as a society. We have a Renaissance literature professor collaborating with a dance professor working in our Global Security Institute, which is focused on defense funding, because these faculty members are doing really creative work with data. And data is one of the biggest, as we know from the ransomware attack last week. Cybersecurity, data security, very critical to the way people live their lives securely, as well as to health security, defense, etc. So the pretty visionary leader of our Global Security Institute brought in this dancer and this Renaissance scholar because they're thinking very creatively about what data means to people historically and in the present day. So think about your research and how it can contribute to grand challenges. And I'd urge you, and this is easier once you have tenure, if that's the line that you're in, than before you get tenure, think outside of the disciplinary expectations for where knowledge production is heading, and think about how the skills and knowledge that you've developed within a disciplinary setting can contribute to broader transdisciplinary efforts that can go to change the world. So you have a choice, and this is something that as I've labeled it, the entrepreneurial professor should think about. Once we're faculty, what kind of research should we do? Are we doing research, and this honestly the way I thought about it when I got my first job as an assistant professor, I'm doing the research I need to do to get tenure. It was really based on a guild model of wanting a lifetime appointment, and I am honestly, I'm very glad I have a lifetime appointment, so I'm not denigrating that. But I do think that many of our faculty spend their first 7 years of life getting tenure, then promotion often to full professor happens within a very narrow range of understanding of what scholarship and knowledge are, and they end up in their 50s finally thinking, well, maybe I'll do something with my life other than try to meet the expectations of this discipline that I chose to enter when I was in my early 20s. So be thinking along the way, even as of course you're trying to achieve the milestones that you'll need to achieve to get job security at an institution you're happy with. Be thinking about where you can contribute, where knowledge, where your passion, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's for solving problems, where that can take you in conjunction with other folks. Think entrepreneurially about how you teach as well as what you teach. Are you going to teach on campus, online, hybrid classes? We have a campus, or we have a set of campuses that have around 70,000 undergraduate students. That is a huge number of undergraduate students. In my unit, we're one of 3 liberal arts colleges, the largest of them. We have about 900 English majors on campus. That's a fairly large department. We now have over 900 English majors pursuing their degrees fully online. And that is an amazing number, and that's happened within 3 years. More and more traditional institutions, you may have seen that Purdue University bought Kaplan, which was a for-profit, pretty shady dealer of higher education. I mean, I think that's a pretty bad move that they made, but they're desperate to get into the online space because, getting back to one of my earlier slides, that is money straight to the coffers, and most of the folks who organize online education at most colleges and universities do it so that each student is coming in at a profit to that particular institution. Do you want to teach online or do you not want to teach online? I would really strongly urge any of you who are not totally finished with your graduate studies to try to figure out how you can get an online teaching credential as part of your dossier. More and more universities want to move to providing online education and going into a job interview and saying, I taught a fully online, so again, in my field, an example, I taught a fully online section of English composition for a community college last year. Even, I'm telling you, even at a research university, that's going to be helpful in your job interview, unless it's one of the small number of places which disdains that kind of education and thinks it's somehow subpar. I don't think it's subpar. I haven't taught a fully online course. I've taught a hybrid course, which is useful to universities because it frees up material resources. It makes classroom use much more efficient. But when I talk to my colleagues who have taught online, even the ones who are very skeptical about it, they have found it to be an unbelievably meaningful part of their lives. You know, our average freshman is still an 9-year-old student. The average online English major or history major or philosophy major, we have hundreds of students in all those disciplines at Arizona State, is a woman in her late 20s to 30s who started college, never finished, whether it was family responsibilities, work responsibilities, other responsibilities that took that person out of college. That's a person who often is not in a place where she or he can get an education. It's actually a very positive social mission to be able to bring high quality education to people who have absolutely no other way to get it. So if we think about ourselves genuinely as educators caring about a country that's highly educated, it is a kind of, I call it a moral responsibility to think about how to reach students that our institutions can't conventionally reach. But it'll also be a very practical advantage to you in securing employment, creating flexibility. We have, I'm now worried about making sure that our faculty teach on campus, because I don't want to lose a sense of department cohesiveness. I have tenured faculty who think they're going to get out of living in, they don't want to, they've got a house in New Hampshire, and they've got a daughter and don't believe in Phoenix public schools, and they've never told me this because I tell them very quickly, you're not allowed to do this. But they tell colleagues, well, I'm going to teach fully online and I'm going to move to New Hampshire, because why not? I think that's a terrible thing, and we have to think about our communities in higher education. But for a semester or 2 semesters, what an incredible amount of flexibility a faculty member can get by teaching fully online. It can aid your research, it can aid you if you do have family responsibilities for a parent or somebody else you have to take care of. Online education is transformational, and not only in a negative way. In fact, I'd say in many more positive ways than negative. Think about, if you're really thinking entrepreneurial, thinking about how you can bring in tuition revenue to your institution, maybe to yourself if you want to do study abroad or some other kind of education as a consultant outside of your institution. That's another way to make some money. But think about the summer, think about interterm, think about study abroad. There are ways both within your institution and outside of your institution that you can really reach some students you wouldn't ordinarily be able to reach and enhance the bottom line either of your institution or of yourself as a kind of independent contractor. So a lot of the stuff that I have been talking about leads many people to think that we are going to erode tenure, that the traditional model of faculty centrality at our institutions of higher education is going to go away because we're relying on more and more independent contractors. So even for faculty who are on the tenure track, thinking of themselves entrepreneurially really means thinking of themselves as independent contractors who have no real substantial connection to the institutions they're a part of. And so the neoliberal university is one in which the faculty member doesn't really have a stake in the operations, in the intellectual life of the institution, beyond fulfilling certain contractual duties of teaching this number of students, producing these many articles, bringing in this amount of grant dollars. That's a dire future, and it's not the kind of college or university that I foresaw myself being part of. I think what's, just my personal opinion, what's going to be really important is for those of you who are finishing your PhDs now and going out into institutions to fight this idea, to persist in thinking that tenure and academic freedom are critical in a very practical sense to the education of our students, to the knowledge that we produce, while functioning entrepreneurially and being open to the way that you do your work. So if the great faculty of the future do not fight it, there will be many more business deals like Purdue buying Kaplan, which I think is a terrible thing for nonprofit higher education, for state higher education, and for students who have been very poorly served by Kaplan. Think about how you function as an independent creative agent within an institutional complex. And I just say there is no easy way to reach that. It's something that most of you will be negotiating throughout your careers, but don't forget that students come to institutions, students value the contact they make with individual faculty members. Research is best accomplished when you're secure within your institutional context. So let's not throw away the things that really value from our traditional notions of higher education while we're thinking more creatively about students, education, philanthropy, research, and how we touch people. Just think about how tenure relates to academic freedom and whether you think in the future tenure will be absolutely central to academic freedom. I personally am somebody who doesn't think tenure should or will go away, yet I think it's going to be important for faculty members to justify what tenure means in a positive sense, as well as the kind of guild approach to it means I can't lose my job and it means I've got an income for the rest of my life unless I really totally screw up. An encouraging thing at my institution is that, we've had a couple of controversies. 3 years ago, an English professor who was coming up for tenure got pilloried on Fox News because he taught a class on the problem of whiteness, which was misinterpreted by the right-wing media as the faculty member saying that whiteness is a problem, which of course it is, but the course was about the intellectual issue of what whiteness means in America today. He's coming up, that's a pretty terrifying thing when you're coming up for tenure and you're being bashed on Fox News. president of the university came out very strongly in support of the research, in support of the education, and the faculty member got tenure. What I'm even more cheered by is a couple of weeks ago, we had a faculty member, a very contingent faculty member who was just teaching a course by the course at the institution, who, the way the right-wing media put it, was that she allowed her students to do a protest against Trump instead of taking a final exam. And that isn't exactly really what happened. She did allow them to do a group project, which probably was a more valuable and meaningful educational experience, rather than taking the final exam. And there was an issue of organization and protest, but it wasn't that kind of protest against Trump and you don't have to take the final exam kind of thing. It would have been very easy for the university, we're in a very Republican state with a Koch-funded governor, it would have been very easy for the president to sort of just say, we're not rehiring you, in fact, we're going to take you out of the classroom because no tenure, no protection formally. The president came down very, very strongly in favor of that faculty member and what she was trying to do in the classroom. So what we also need is to enable good academic leadership to support strong faculty work. And that means faculty continuing to do genuine, excellent work, even if it's controversial, but also getting the right kind of administrators who are not just counting the beans, but who also care deeply about the academic mission. Think about, I kind of thought to myself, think about what it means to be in a discipline. If you're, whether you're a chemical engineer or a sociologist or a nurse going into teaching, what does it mean to be part of a discipline versus what does it mean to be a researcher contributing to the public good, an educator giving students the skills and the knowledge to succeed in the world? I personally find departments to be constraining. I'm no longer really a very active member of an English department because I thought of English departments as being a little bit like prison. What is the role of your department? How does your department relate to your discipline? The disciplines were constructed largely in the 19th century, so we are living out a model of knowledge organization that was created 150 years ago. Do we need that same organization of knowledge? All of you are being enculturated into that, because are there any interdisciplinary PhDs here, or are you all within departments? So we're all, that's part of who we are becoming when we become PhD students, and part of being PhD education is disciplining you into a particular way of thinking about the world through structures of thought and through bodies of knowledge that conform to these disciplines and may or may not be productive of giving students real education and changing the world through the production of knowledge. Think about what your students need genuinely. Think about how your research can change the world. And think about what you want to do. Is it within your discipline for the rest of your life? Or is the discipline one way of thinking that's not the end of the line for you? And I think that's an individual decision. I don't think the disciplines are going away. I don't think they should go away because they provide ways for us to think about the world in really highly complex and insightful ways. But think about what your relationship is as you're thinking entrepreneurial. Think about your relationship to your discipline versus your role as an educator, as a researcher, as a member of a community. Think about your students and think about how you serve them. Diversity is not just the way many institutions of higher education have approached it. Diversity is about bringing students from different backgrounds into an academic culture that exists for its own way, almost as a pure model of knowledge. I totally disagree with that. In fact, I think our universities of the future and our faculties of the future are going to excel because they welcome diversity in national background, in race, in ethnicity, in religion, in culture, in sexuality. We bring people in not because we want them to learn the way we think, but because the things that we care about, whether it's a discipline, whether it's about our students, whether it's about changing the world, they are going to be enhanced by people sometimes with absolutely divergent points of view to what we've spent 20 years training ourselves in. Think about what diversity really means to you, to your department, to your school, to your students. It's not just inclusion, it's how we do every single aspect of our work. Be open to listening to people and be open to be challenged. It's hard when you've spent 5, 6, 7, 8 or more years doing a PhD. It's sort of tough to go out into the world and be deeply challenged on every aspect of what you do and why you do it. Be open to the challenge and be open to changing the way you do things, because I truly believe that excellence is driven and is increasingly in universities of the future going to be driven by diversity. It's not going to be accommodating diversity. The best institutions are those which are fully open to multiple perspectives and ways of thinking. So, where will the entrepreneurial professor reside? We have a model, and I'm part of the PI on a grant from the Modern Language Association, which is sort of the kind of guild for English and foreign language professors, but we have a grant to help PhD students think about alternative careers to academia, called Connected Academics. What I'm finding in talking to students more and more is that the old notion of either you're inside of a university, you're either an academic or you're a non-academic, is something that some students that I've talked to are less comfortable with. What would it mean to create a career both within and outside of academia? What does it mean to go back and forth between industry or a non-teaching job and come back to teaching? Obviously, with issues of tenure, that's very complicated. All of the structures we have are how to wall off our institutions. You've come in, we welcome you. After 6 or 7 years, we decide you're one of us, and then you're with us for the rest of your lives. I mean, it sounds horrifying, it sounds like a bad thing, now that you think about it. But we don't allow for much passage inside and outside of the walls of academia. I think that's going to change when we bring in practitioners, whether it's a movie director or a screenwriter, into the humanities at Arizona State. Students are incredibly excited about that. So our students are more open to a wider range of experiences of those people who are teaching them than we are. Most of us still have a pretty kind of closed mentality about who we are and what we do. But I think that's going to change. And think about how whether you're going to be a tenure track faculty member or whether you primarily or initially go into industry but want to come back and teach, want to be collaborators with faculty members who do education and particular kind of research for their lives. Think about where you're going to be. Also, think about where you actually live. I mentioned the way that I've got some faculty members who think that with online education now they can go live somewhere hundreds or thousands of miles away from the campus and still do their jobs. I'm not in favor of that, but there are going to be many, many more opportunities for you if you're thinking creatively about what you do and how you do it. Think about where you're going to live. And there are going to be, higher education isn't going away. How do you find a role within a higher education landscape and maybe have some more control over where you live than most of your faculty probably ever did. If you ask most faculty members, why do you live in Syracuse, New York, or Tempe, Arizona? Well, that's where I got a job. Think about ways in which, as you think creatively about your careers, now there are some disciplines where you might have a choice, but in mine, not really. You go where the job is. And finally, think about, in the changing landscape of higher education, what's gained, what kind of freedom, what kind of access to students, what kind of transdisciplinary research, those kinds of things, what's gained, but also keep in mind what's lost, because the old model of the kind of monastery of higher education, where we live together, study together, work together. There are aspects of that which I think still have value. So as you think about shaping your career and shaping your institutions, don't forget about the past even while you're trying to accommodate what's happening. So happy to have a conversation now for a few minutes before lunch, if there's time.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well thank you all, and let's... Yeah. And why don't you say what your name is and your discipline?
My name is Eric. I'm a political scientist, allegedly. So I just want to ask a little bit about the concept of entrepreneurship, the way that you're talking about it. One of the problems that I have with the concept of entrepreneurship is that it sort of shifts the focus away from structural problems and the institution to the individual, so that it lodges all the problems or all the failures and successes on the individual, which that's a whole narrative that we could spend this entire conference digging into, and we all have the conceptual tools to do that. But I'm really thinking about that from the examples that and you're getting more and more specific about kind of using ASU as an example, but then also the industry more broadly. And I guess my question for you is this, because you're telling us to do this, you're exhorting us to do this.
Well, okay.
I mean, you are. But it's how are individuals expected to kind of flourish, and I mean that in the Aristotelian sense of flourishing in these kind of institutional environments where, so for example, the ASU online, and I have a lot of friends at ASU, and I have a lot of friends who've taught there. Their experiences teaching online have not been rewarding, and part of that is that you get a 100-person class where you're being paid $3,000. That is not a sustainable model for individuals to flourish and grow in this way. So how do you navigate that, and I guess particularly from the institutional side? Because those are decisions.
Sure, and I would say that's less to do with online, because we're also paying people to teach 100 students $3,000. There aren't that many people who are really getting paid. That's the 3,200, to get very technical, is our faculty associate rate, which is for the fully contingent faculty. It is on university, I think I mentioned it, I think this is really true, faculty have to hold administrators to a high standard for serving students. And it is complicated within particular institutional contexts. So, I mean, I think online's not really the issue there. If somebody's not had a good experience teaching online, maybe they haven't. But adjuncts teaching a large bulk of undergraduate students without job security, without a real salary, that's a pretty awful thing. I'll go back to a very particular example, and some good things that we've done at my institution, some things that are not so good. We have different ranks of non-tenure track faculty. And this is a question, if we are going to have universities that in which half the students are taught by non-tenure track faculty, how do those students excel and how do the faculty flourish? Because these people are members of our community. So one thing that we have tried to do, and I think this is a good thing to do, is reduce those one-off faculty positions. Now, some of them are grad students who have outlived their commitment of support for 4 or 5 years, and so they're happy to take an adjunct, not happy, they're taking an adjunct job because they have nothing else to do, and maybe those are the folks that you know who have done that. But what we've tried to reduce that. What that also means is hiring a certain number of non-tenure track contract faculty. Now that's a question, can you flourish in your philosophical sense? Are you flourishing if you are teaching 5 classes of English composition a semester and making $50,000 a year? That's an open question, and I don't think I have an answer to that. I think we're paying our faculty who teach 5 sections of freshman composition a year, we're paying them $49,000 a year, minimum. If they stay, they can get raised like anybody else, with full health and retirement and other kinds of benefits. Can one, let me ask you, can one flourish in those circumstances or not?
Potentially, yeah, but it's the broader question. I mean, it's this idea of entrepreneurship more generally. So I've got, yeah.
So I think that if you are a passive victim and you have nothing else to do and you don't see a way of economically sustaining yourself other than teaching 4 classes at 4 different institutions for $3 or $2 or $4,000 a shot, you're not taking an active role, and I'm not blaming you for doing that, I'm certainly not talking to you individually, but I'm not blaming a person who does that for taking that kind of role, and I don't think that's productive either for our institutions or for our students. There are many administrators who think that's a cheap way of getting our students taught, and there's a surplus of qualified people to teach in many disciplines, so we can do it. It's just the market. I don't think that's appropriate, but those folks who do that are often not thinking creatively about the work that they can do in the world. I think it is a scandal. We have too many PhD students in our English department, and many of them end up taking these full-time instructor positions. And I would agree with you. You might be able to flourish in that circumstance, but you're not going to flourish if you've taken that because you see no other way out of the predicament into which you've been put. Now, I think that's why I think our PhD programs need to be thinking more creatively about how we're educating our students. I know that the PhD program in English at Arizona State is training students for the exact jobs that their professors have, where the chances of their getting those jobs are minimal. And that's on us. That's a faculty responsibility, and to a lesser extent a university responsibility. So it's not saying tough crap, just get out there and pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It's how do we think about our institutions, and how do those of us in a position to be able to think about the structure of the institution create creative environments that also allow for the security that promotes the kind of flourishing that you discuss. Now, I wouldn't say that my university has come up with the answer to how to do that, but at least we're thinking about it. And I guess what I'd say is the old model is not going to work. Harvard is going to work because of $25 billion endowment. Michigan is going to work because the state's not really quite willing to let go of it. I'm not even sure Wisconsin is going to continue working. There are really, really outstanding institutions of higher education where the entire model is going to be pulled out from students and faculty without any of the deliberation or creativity that might allow those institutions to adapt. So if you're either thinking the future of higher education is bleak and everything that we stand for is dead and you're exploiting me, or who cares, we're making it work and students are getting educated, those are both untenable situations. So what I would say is, yes, I'm exhorting you to think this way, not because I have a religious belief in it, it's because practically, if you want to have some power over your lives, rather than being sort of the recipients of what a really terrible situation is offering you, you almost have no choice but at least to think about these things. And then consciously reject them and go on a path that makes sense for you as a person. But I'm not justifying, I do think thinking entrepreneurially is going to help our students and help research, but it should be within a context of support for those endeavors by our institutions rather than withdrawing that support and saying, now you got to make up for it with this kind of activity. Does that make sense? And there's no answer to that because we are in this period of flux, and I'm hopeful that things will come out better, but I'm not even that confident about it.
So,
Name and just
Stephanie Wyatt, my personal discipline is biblical studies, and I work at SU for Women in Science and Engineering.
Okay.
So, what I would like to know is along these same lines, but so I see the model that you're presenting, and I totally experience every day that what you're saying is certainly the way I experience Syracuse University currently. But my question is, it so revolves, at least for me, around a business model of doing things. And I have a problem with that because I think that not every institution has to be run by certain types of business principles. So what I would like to know is if there are institutions out there that are trying to do something different different than this and are being successful at it, do you know what institutions those would be?
Well, I think it's impossible for a $1 billion or $2 billion entity not to be run like a business, but I don't see running something like a business. Business is the wrong word. Run it like an enterprise. What does it mean to be able to pay your bills and to organize the work for maximum benefit to students and maximum creativity? That's what all of our institutions should be doing. I think that many institutions do this to varying degrees. I think many of them are going to have to. I mean, the institution I'm at right now is trying to do this. What I'd say is that there is a healthy tension between faculty, and students too, but faculty who really oppose this and are entrenched within the organizational tenure, which is a good thing, and a university that wants to keep pushing us to think differently. But I don't really see the alternative to, there are two ways that faculty and staff can think about this. They can say, I'm going to let the business people run the finances as long as I get my salary and have enough resources to fulfill the parameters of my job expectation. I don't actually think that's the best way to do it, because if faculty are really going to be empowered to make the changes in institutions that allow people to flourish, to use that word, they're going to need to understand something about the underpinnings of the institution. And those are financial, organizational, and also ultimately their curricular, their research, and so forth. So you can either say, if you're at one of those lucky institutions, like Ivy League schools, which have plenty of money and plenty of people willing to pay exorbitant tuition to go there, they don't have to think about this. Every other institution is going to have to think about it, because you're going to have to attract students and donors and research dollars to make the university work. So I guess I don't think there's an option to thinking about it. It doesn't mean that all of your academic values or your work are somehow geared towards a bottom line that is generated outside of the sphere of your own intellectual commitment and expertise.
Okay, well, in that case, since I can't get you to talk about alternative models, then why don't you tell us who's doing what you're talking about well? Would be something maybe.
Well, I can talk about experiments. I don't think any institution has transformed itself.
Yeah, but who would be your models?
Well, where I am right now is a model of how I think about it. And the core principles are excellence is defined by access, that we're committed to the students that we bring in, that we're committed to the communities in which we live, that our research is going to have public value. I mean, these are certain principles that have allowed for a reorientation of academic disciplines and interdisciplinary efforts to some extent, let's say to 30% of the institution's overall business. So 30% of the students, 30% of the faculty are really engaged in different ways of thinking about what they do and how they serve. I think that's a fairly large percentage for a pretty conservative set of institutions in higher education. What I think is happening, unfortunately, is that most institutions are they're either going to go wacky, like Purdue, which hired Mitch Daniels to be president, and is going to disrupt the things that are valuable in our traditional systems of higher education. They're either really going to go wacky and think they're being innovative and disruptive, or they're going to stick their heads in their sands and just figure out more and more how to squeeze a little bit more out of that stone of prestige so we can attract students who are willing to pay tuition and just, even though the federal research dollars are shrinking, we're going to maintain just enough of an edge to retain that prestige that's going to allow us to bring in those students. But I think basically I'm not that optimistic, because I don't think many institutions are really willing to look deeply. I don't think many presidents or provosts stay very long, and so even the ones who have good ideas about how to make their institutions meet the real demands, they head off after 5 years and somebody else comes in with a new set of ideas. So I'm not really optimistic. And what I'm really afraid of is, instead of all of us engaged in this endeavor, trying to think creatively about what we do, we're going to be managed by genuine business people rather than thinking of this as a collaborative business in which we're all engaged for the benefit of students and for the benefit of the public.
I'm Herb Ruffin, Chair of African American Studies. There's a couple of things that I would raise up here at Syracuse University, and I would say for everybody here, a key is to get to understand the institution that you're trying to go into. And there are a couple of questions that you may want to ask. One is RCM, or to look at whatever model, to ask that place if you're up for a job or trying to go for that job, what is your financial model? That's one. And look into that as well. You know, what exactly does that mean in terms of responsibility centered management? Another one is in terms of middle states. For us, we have middle states, and every place has their own assessments that they're trying to push. In terms of the school that you're applying for, what are they trying to push for? How do they see themselves? You know that? In terms of how are they going to try to assess themselves going forward? And does that match with the financial system that they have? And another one is just simply shared governance. You know, does that exactly exist at the school that you are dealing in? You know, is the governance, is a lot of decisions made before it even reaches, you know, the faculty itself or reaches the public within that school? If not, then, you know, you make the decision yourself. There's a couple of other things, and I'll be done with this. One is inside New York, we have a very unique situation in which Cuomo has just pushed something, in which the 4 years, SUNYs as well as CUNYs, 2 year. This is something that I've heard behind the scenes, that executive administrators they just don't know what to think about this. Is it, they don't know how to quantify this? This is what a lot of people are deeply engaged in, is this whole, we have to quantify everything and they don't know what to do about this. How is this going to impact a place like Syracuse University, and where you have this academic excellence that they used to play off of, and was out, you know, the two did not get muddled. Now you have these things beginning to start to get muddled. What is that going to mean for a place like Syracuse University? Private school, and another one is, the last one is STEM, in which we've had a ton of deans, most of which are probably, I would say, scientist oriented, and they pretty much are thinking very similar, trying to push STEM onto people. I'm a humanist. So I'm like, you know, okay, what does this necessarily mean, and what does it mean being inside a unit like the College of Arts and Sciences, even though they would not say it's a service-oriented college? What does that mean for a space like that, in which that is the key space if you want to raise up the quality of education? So these are things to look out for, you know, I'm just saying.
I mean, I think those are all really important. The role of the humanities in almost all of our universities is something that is deeply. How many of you are in the humanities? So a lot of you, and I'd love to continue that part of the conversation. It's something that's every single president and provost is going to say humanities are so important, and then when it gets down to the bottom line, they are shortchanged and so forth. The other thing I'd like to pull out of that, maybe, and I know we're running out of time, faculty governance, and what is faculty governance going to mean, but also what does it mean now? And I think that that faculty governance is something in deep need of engagement and activity at all levels of the faculty as a productive partner to the rest of the institution. At institutions where I've been, not so much right now, faculty governance has ended up being a small body of folks very opposed to what's going on in most of the institution, in which personal grievances take priority over broad institutional thinking. And that is a really, and now I'm on the administrative side, so the faculty out there can get very angry at me, but that is an experience that I've had. How do we, meaning everybody engaged at the institution, put faculty and a very wide variety of faculty, not just the tenure track faculty at the heart of thinking deeply about what the institution is doing in education and research. And so a total rethink and an energy from younger people coming into the universities and colleges, it's going to be really important to make that continue to be meaningful.
I think we better wrap up the formal part of this and continue informally at the lodge. Food ought to be ready now. Concurrent sessions start in only 1